We're getting there. This is German. Welcome to Wing Talk, everybody. I'm your host, Steve Schlesinger. This week, we have the Long Range FPV show everyone's been looking forward to. This could be really a fantastic show. A lot of interest in this. We have Archangel himself, Mr. Nikola, help me with this one, Gorevsky, but he will be here to talk about this. In the meantime, we'd like to introduce Mr. Mark Hoffman, all the way from Halle, Germany.
Hey guys, nice to be here again, and as we have a special guest today, you can, all our watchers can ask questions in the chat. Try to keep the questions on topic about what we are talking about, and later we have an open round where you can ask what you want. So, back to you, Steve.
All right, fantastic. All right, we got some guys from England now. So I should just mention that Mark is kind of like our technical guru as far as INAV is concerned. He's the guy that answers all the questions about INAV. Darren is the guy who actually does our OpenTX build for the group. It's a fantastic build if you're just getting into INAV. Then he has a OpenTX Pro build that just came out recently too. In the last episode, we were surprised with that. So really a lot of great stuff. He also manages the domain. All information can be found at inavfixedwinggroup.com, and it should be on the side on the YouTube, so you can go to the link there. That has all our resources. Darren, what's going on?
Yeah, everything's great, Steve. That was one hell of an advertising segment there. But no, everything's going great. Looking forward to this chat.
Fantastic. Hey, I was going to ask you, I've never heard this before, but all of a sudden, like, all I've heard over the last 2 days is wings, wings, wings. You got to download a copy of it, right?
No, not yet. I've got the frames per second demo, but I've not actually downloaded the game yet. I might do. I'm undecided at the moment. It's either that or Flight Sim 2020, and I'm sort of leaning towards that at the moment.
That sounds cool. All right. Also, from the same part of England, is Portsmouth. Yeah, we have same city. We have somebody who's the youngest among us. Is like more than half my age, but also is the guy who's been flying the longest in the group. Luke, what's going on, babes?
Yeah, everything's good. Yeah. Terrible weather, though, but luckily we're not flying.
Okay, great. So, yeah, you can't fly today because the weather's not great?
No, we have a solid 3 weeks of terrible weather coming for England, so lots of building time.
Oh, wow. That's right. This is build month, by the way, so we will be talking about that.
Perfect.
Yeah, we'll be talking about building this month. We'll switch the banner over. In the meantime, I was going to just mention one thing. We have people, I want to mention the groups that are co-sponsored this talk today. First one is Long Range FPV. So, fantastic group. Mike Virgin, great guy. He's really helpful in our group, but he's also in that group as well. He manages that group. A lot of great information there. If you're into long range FPV, definitely it's a group to join. Bros, Beer, and FPV. I got to meet those guys, the administrators. They are definitely bros. That is a great group. Fantastic people. Really appreciate their support. Fixed Wing RC Rebels, and that is Darren's group. And so thank you, Darren, for having us linked in on as well. And then RC Foam Flyers, which is a group that's just for not really long-range pilots. These are mainly guys who fly line of sight. So this is we got guys watching from that group. This is the first time for them. So as far as all this stuff is concerned, and we'll try to keep you in mind as far as what we're talking about. We're not going to go too deep into the weeds, but just wanted to mention, maybe I'll throw this back to Luke really quick. As far as INAV is concerned, can you explain it briefly?
You want me to explain INAV?
Yeah, what it's about. I mean,
that's a big one. That's a lot of responsibility, Steve.
Okay. I got to keep you on your toes. Yeah.
Okay. INAV is an autopilot. It's good for lots of different skill levels, right from beginners all the way up to, very experienced pilots. It can be used with FPV or without FPV. It came from the beta flight lineage, so clean flight, multi-wii, that kind of thing. Runs on STM32 processors. Yeah.
Perfect. Darren, anything to add to that?
Not really. It's there to assist people. If you're a learner, it can assist you by keeping the plane level. If you want to fly missions, or you can do. There's a lot of stuff it can do. So yeah, it's really just about diving in and having a play, really. But yeah.
So basically, the technology at INAV is based off of, it's not cell phones, the smartphone technology, but it's a diversion from the smartphone technology. They're flight controllers, so it's the same thing that flies what you think of as drones, like DVI drones. We put those in planes. We use cameras, FPV cameras, so we can watch the video through goggles, and you have to use a video transmitter. INAV, this little computer, will put an OSD in there so we know how high we are. It has all this telemetry. We know how high we are, how far away we are, where we're going. And if you get stuck or if you go out of range, the plane turns around and comes back. That's because it has GPS. So anyway, there's the whole reason why we wanted to get Nikola into the show today was because we're talking about another operating system known Autopilot. And we talked about that last week, but this week we were just so excited to talk to Nikola more about long-range FPV, because it's something that I think about 1 out of every 10 people who signs up for the group, in particular, mentions, I want to get into long-range FPV. So without further ado, we have Mr. Archangel himself, Nikola, let me make sure I get this name right, Koevsky.
Yeah.
Did I get that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Thank you.
Fantastic. It's great to have you here. Hey, Nikola, we want to find out about you as far as your background is concerned. What you lived there in Bulgaria, but kind of tell us how you got started in planes and everything else. So you seem to be like focused on the long range aspect of FPV. How did this all come about?
Well, it was a pretty natural way of things. The way I got here is just jumping off of one thing to the next one, and sort of ended here because it's the the most vast thing of all of the things I've done. I mean, there's no limits to what you can do, where you can go. It is interesting. I mean, that's the one thing that has stayed throughout the years. And ever since I got into it, all the other stuff I was into sort of faded away, coming in and out of the picture, occasionally. But that's the one main thing that sort of kept, because it's the most thrilling one, to be honest. My background, nothing fancy. I'm not an engineer. I've not studied anything technical. Actually, that was a point in my life to avoid anything involving math. So I ended up studying economy and business and whatnot, and ended up not working anything related to that, because this is pretty much my full-time job at the moment, has been for a while. Yeah, so started it as a hobby, and actually the blog I write about this started as my own database, where I just catalog everything I'm doing for my own reference. And I decided to start sharing that on a few forums, and little by little people got interested in that. And at some point, people started contacting me to do reviews of this or that. And then I actually started doing the videos properly, because up to that point, it was just, what most people do. You film at the field, you come back, you just cut it quickly and upload it, no commentary, no nothing. So at some point, just took that extra step, and things sort of went upwards from there. And it was a natural progression of things. I wasn't flying a lot of FPV, but actually I started with FPV. I started with copters, I don't know how long ago. It was 6, maybe 7 years ago. I'm not exactly sure. During a winter, I remember that, with a toy helicopter, one of those coaxial thingies. Looked like one of the choppers from Avatar. And that's what got me interested. And then somehow I ended up building a quadcopter using a KK board, but not the one with the screen before that, with the pots. And then I got an EDF model. That was my first plane, along with the copter stuff. I ended up building probably 20 versions of those copters with those flight controllers. Then got into EDF planes. That's what actually got me into planes. A small 35mm EDF jet. That was the first plane I flew myself. And from there, started building planes using foam board, or it's not exactly foam board here. We don't have that thing with the paper backing. It's just the foam bit. It's just Depron foam, no cardboard backing to it. And then just planes started getting bigger, stepped outside of the EDF scene, started buying other planes, and then I came across the FPV Raptors from back then it was Lian Yu Hobby, if I remember it correctly, before they changed the name to X Hobby and branched off Volantex and like a sub-brand and all that modern restructuring. And so basically that's how you get into long range FPV. You crash a lot of FPV Raptors, and once you learn how to not crash them, you're ready to get into the more serious stuff. that is what did it for me. You have no clue. If you actually go back through my videos all the way to the beginning, you get an idea of what I've been through and how I got here. But the FPV Raptors and the Ranger X were actually a very large steps in that process, because even though you crash that thing again and again and again and again, because they just refused to fly slow, and I was loading them up a lot because I wanted the autopilot and the gimbal and the camera and the video transmitter and all of that, and a huge battery, and it was like 2.5 kilos for a plane that should not be that much, and trying to fly it slower, just getting distracted for a second and it would go down in a second, literally. I've just had it flying on its own somewhere, and I'm keeping an eye on it, and I just turn around for 2 seconds, turn back, videos out, planes nowhere to be seen. Yeah, it just at that exact moment the battery disconnects and it goes into a spiral, and it took a few seconds to go from 300 meters straight into the ground. Still repairable, because that plastic fuselage is just unbelievable.
You're talking about the Volantex Ranger, right?
Yeah, nowadays that's the Volantex. No, I'm talking about the Volantex Raptor series.
Oh, Raptor.
Those were before the current Rangers. The current Ranger is actually what came after the Raptor. But the Raptor had the same, the fuselage was from the same plastic. The wings were shit. And they were, the profile of the wings required speed, which you did not have often, because at some point you would like to fly slowly. But at the end, I used to land that plane at probably 50 or 60 kilometers an hour. And that's not something that has wheels or anything. But because the plastic is so strong, even if you land on tarmac, it would roll for like 100 meters, but it's still good. The plastic was amazing. The plastic was amazing. A foam plane, you would have gone through, I don't know, 20 planes with the amounts of crashing I've done of that plane. And I've only been through 3 fuselages, and they actually all are good up to this day.
Wow. So the EDF he's talking about is the electronic ducted fan. So
Yeah.
those are,
Right.
yeah, those for speed. Those are speed, little speed demons.
Actually, no. Just like a lot of stuff back then, I was not using them that way. I was more interested in aerobatic flying using EDF planes. So when I got my 3D printer, that was maybe 6 years ago or something. I bought a MakerBot replicated 2X or X2. I don't know exactly what the name is. And I actually, the first thing I designed was a vector thrust unit for the EDFs, because I really wanted to get that 3D going. Up to that point, I would fly it as much as, you know, just the regular control surfaces would allow for this jet to be 3D. But I ended up actually flying EDFs for over 10 minutes, whereas other people around me that flew them barely made it to the 3-minute mark, because they were gunning for speed. I was gunning for show.
I remember seeing you do them. It must have been 6 or 7 years ago, and it was with a white plane that had like red 3D printed parts, wasn't it? It was something like that.
I've had a lot of VDFs.
Oh, you had quite a lot of them.
I've had a heck of a lot of VDFs. My favorite one was a 64mm Rafale. I don't know how you pronounce that. Rafale.
Raphael, I think. Yeah.
It's the French one. That was a stunning looking plane for one, and then it was just an absolute stunner as a flyer as well. That was by far my favorite plane, and I actually still have it in pieces, of course, because that was often what used to happen. You know, you just get playing around with it very close to the ground. One mistake is all it takes to have it in a few pieces. you spend the evening fixing it, and you go back the next day, try again.
Yeah, I have no own experience with EDF planes yet, but a friend of mine, he bought some plane, very cheap one. It was in a Ranger style, with the EDF included in the fuselage, above the back tail spar. It was really weird setup, but that EDF really was just loud and current consuming, but it had no power at all. So I think EDFs are a thing where you have to really look for quality components, because there are so many cheap EDF motors out there that are absolute garbage, with no thrust and just pulling amps as hell.
Yeah, they do pull amps as hell, and I ended up replacing most of the stock units on most of my planes.
One thing that I wanted to ask you about, seeing you're going through your history right now, we've had a fair number of people on the group here, and it's amazing to hear how many of us have not been doing it that long. As far as, you know, myself, it's been about 5 years. Other than I started learning how to, my first RC plane was back in the 1990s. It was a Zaggy. I took it to a park. I threw it 40 times at the ground and gave up. And, you know, but I started learning on the real flight how to fly RC planes, and from there I was able to get into this. But it seems like you and Luke both have a history that goes back more than 5 years. I mean, Powell also has been about 5 years. Darren's been about 5 years. Mark's been about 5 years. So this history you have with probably sounds like it predates. How many years is that, Darren?
3.
Well, 3 years. Okay. This history you have sounds like it predates the flight controllers. So you've seen the whole evolution of the flight controllers as well, right?
Yeah.
What I remember from the earliest, because like I said, I started with copters, and back then you had to have some sort of control board. So at that point, KK 1.1. I don't know the version.
The one without the screen.
Yeah, it was
the 1.1.
It was the last version of that board without a screen, shortly after the one with the, maybe not shortly after, a few months, half a year, I can't exactly recall, that came out. But there was the DJI NASA, which was available at that time as well, but you know, in comparing prices was just insane. That board was $10. The DJI NASA back then was over like 200 euros or something.
Wow.
Yeah, and you know, you put that on. I eventually bought that because, you know, you get hooked up and it sort of goes to hell. You know, all your money goes to hell. You might as well be burning it somewhere. But anyway, at least this is more productive. So I bought eventually the NASA, but before that I went through all of these KK, Mutiwi, I don't know. I tried a few of them and wasn't exactly satisfied. And actually, the NASA was the first one that actually worked, though I got the one, I can't recall. I did not get a GPS unit, or it didn't have one back then. So my first FPV flights were with very, very crappy setup, very crappy antennas, and no GPS. And basically, I'd take the copter up a few hundred meters and would keep it in place by keeping it above my head and just trying to keep the small, very small dot right above my head. Try not to let the current stake it anywhere. Those were interesting times, and looking back at that, and I'm thinking, you know, that was difficult. Nowadays, you get a Matic board or something, and you just flash it, solder the ESCs, plug in the GPS, and it would stay up all day, all on its own, and it costs nothing.
It's true.
I mean, for the price of a NASA back then, you can just put together a whole copter or a plane or something, like everything.
Kind of like the Vector.
Well, the Vector was expensive, and that was I don't know when that started. Does that support copters? I'm not sure. I've never used it. It does. I don't know when that started, but back then I don't think it did. It was a plane-only controller.
We were just going over it last week. The Vector Eagle Trees decided to close down, and unfortunately,
I did watch part of that live actually.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So we figured out that the cost of the Vector, you pretty much build a whole plane with INAV on it. So, and not like a high-end plane, but it's something that gets you flying. So fantastic. All right. So one thing I would say is like what I really noticed. Not being around back then, but somewhere around 2014, 2015, the motors that have come out for quads and also have gotten so insanely good.
Yeah. Actually, race quads are the thing that really pushed the hobby along in terms of technology. Because up until that point, it was stagnant. Like you had Hobby King and they had 300 different kinds of motors, but that was it. And they were plane motors, and you had to somehow find suitable airplane motors to build copters with, and then you try to put gimbals on. It was weird time. The time I've wasted and money I've wasted trying to get a decent copter running, no vibrations, a smooth video, and then DJI comes out with the Phantom 2 and just killed everything. And Phantom 3 just buried it. Buried what was left, and at that point, I just took apart all of my copters and said, "That's it. That is just done. There's no point in this anymore because this is ridiculous." The Phantom 3 was literally what did it for DJI. The one was nothing special, but it was flying, and it was flying good, sort of reliable. The 2 was also pretty good, and you had the readily available options for gimbals that you can attach. It did have the occasional return back to China option. And then they pretty much solved all of that with the Phantom 3 and basically killed the DIY video camera copter segment of the hobby. Yeah. Literally drove it into the ground or pushed it into the ground or something. That was the end of it, and I felt it, like I noticed it.
But they continued for a long time with the F450 and F650 frames and all their DJI NASA DIY setups. But it was still, of course, all one packet from the same manufacturer. I think it was more for special purposes if you want to use your own camera rigs.
Even those, even those did not
Luke, you gotta say something.
You can get with a Phantom.
I've actually got a DJI S550 F550 here.
I was flying back then when the Phantom 3 came out, I was flying a Y6, 6 or 7 kilogram tricopter that had an X-cam gimbal of about that size. The gimbal alone was 1.5 kilograms, swinging around a Sony Alpha 6000 camera, and that was probably the only copter ever out of all of my builds that I managed to get flying decently reliably and managed to take out pretty much all of the vibrations, since I was able to actually zoom in the camera and still not see any vibrations up to a point. And then the Phantom 3 came out, and I was just it's 1 kilo and 200 grams, and it does a better job. You don't have the zoom, but it was a much lighter thing to fly. You can easily take it around, because that thing would weigh a lot, and it would take like half of the back seat to take it with me anywhere. Whereas the Phantom, you just strap it with a few batteries in a backpack, throw it somewhere, and you're done. And I actually, at some point, I got one secondhand, and I'm still using it to this day, and I'm literally raping it on every flight, because I use it to chase planes around for my reviews, and a lot of these planes simply cannot fly slower than 60 kilometers an hour, and 60 is pretty much pushing it for the Phantom 3. You need to be flying with the wind to get that fast, and this thing is still flying. I'm literally trying to break it, and it's still refusing to give up. It is a stunning piece of technology, and that's the 3, and we're up to 4 Pro whatever now. I don't know which the latest one is.
Mark, you have a question?
Yeah, there's Bravo Golf in the chat right now. He wrote also racing quads which have fueled board development, and I have to agree here, because all this FPV community and race quads, freestyle quads, all that stuff with very high numbers of sold pieces that really push the development, even for things like DJI drones, for example, because they also learn from that how this all is done, and they can transfer that to their own technology.
Yeah, I was gonna talk about that actually, because I also did, in the dawn of racing quads, or I can't recall exactly where I got the idea now, but at some point I managed to get some smaller motors from somewhere. I think it was although I was talking with one of the guys over there, Jason Clark, and we were talking a lot, and he said, well, we've got these new motors coming in that are really small but high kV, and they're actually more oriented towards smaller racing copters, because apparently somehow that's becoming a thing. And I was like, okay, let's try them on. And I actually designed a few frames around those copters. He sent me a few to test. I burned a few out just to see what these things can take. But once race copters took off, the beginning was just hideous of those things. Motors were vibrating a lot, props were shit, controllers were shit, the code was shit, everything shit, frames were shit. And then all of a sudden, you know, this took off because it was compact, it was easy to understand, and there was this competitive nature that is easy to access. And actually not only flight control boards, ESCs, motors, FPV gear especially, and the 5.8 band actually got a huge boost because of racing copters. Those things actually got money put into them. And, you know, the results are pretty obvious. And that is actually what pushed the hobby in terms of technology. Like, it was a huge leap forward.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, way back when, back in the 1990s, for example, if you wanted to get your first RC plane flying, you would be spending $300 on a motor, and that was a cheap one, you know, for your gas motors. Yeah, and then you would, you know, maybe want to spend $400 or $500 to get something even nicer. And then there was like, guys who would like not eat lunch for a month. It's just like save up enough money so they can go out and buy this stuff. And now, we're telling you to build your first plane, and these little $15 motors that, a lot of the guys who fly competitively race drones would never touch because they're like 3 years old are absolutely fabulous for these planes.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
2204, 2205s. Yeah. So for smaller planes, we have to, really have to thank the RC community and the racing drone community in particular, because those guys, the quad guys, really.
Actually, I'm sorry for interrupting.
Go ahead.
Back then you also had like 5, 6, 7 years ago, there were motors that would cost $9, $8. I've seen them down to $8, 20 or 12 or 13 or $15, but they were shit. They'd need balancing, and then you'd put the prop on, and that whole thing would need balancing again. It was very weird. I've spent so much time balancing props and motors separately and then putting them together and balancing them dynamically as a single unit. I still do up to this day, but I do this only for the large planes. Anything nowadays that has a KV rating of, I don't know, anything over 1,500 just does not require balance. At some point, they started making them cheap and pretty good that you basically pair it with any modern day prop and it just runs for the most part without, yeah.
Hey, Luke, go ahead.
All right.
Yeah, see, I actually have a bit of a different take on it. I started in buying motors and stuff, making my own planes probably around 2008 or so. And even then, there was a motor called the Blue Wonder motor. And that was also called a Turnigy 2730, I think. And it was about £12 or something, so $15. And it's absolutely amazing. I still have it on 2 planes behind me. Like a really solid motor. It weighed 24 grams, a little bit lighter than the current racing motors, and put out about 400-500 grams of thrust on a 3-cell LiPo with an 8-inch prop. So they were around, but yeah, they were definitely less common than they are now.
Yeah, but motors now are very, very different from what they were back then. Yeah. A lot better, I think.
Yeah.
And they also managed to improve thrust to weight ratio for the motors, because like a 24-gram racing motor now can put out 1.5 kilograms of thrust. I mean, this is ridiculous. I look at the specs of these things and just my jaw drops. How the hell do you get that without it bursting into pieces or, catching fire in an instant?
Absolutely. So you're talking about how you had to balance props and how you had to balance motors and everything. Is this how, when I notice, especially when I watch your reviews, because I've been watching for years, you have a way of just going through and just meticulously going from start to finish. I mean, for example, I was not even thinking about the Ranger line of planes, but when you discussed them, I was like, wow, I got to get one of these. So this has been your whole take. Yeah, you've been good for like half the planes in my garage. So.
All right. Yeah, actually, I get a lot of comments. I review a plane and then people start commenting, oh crap, I have to buy another plane now. Yeah, and that's been happening more and more. But I do like the Volantex planes, and especially the plastic ones, because they are tough as hell. I mean, you want to get something that you can plant into the ground at speed and just be confident that you can put the pieces back together and fly it the very next day. And I've done that a few times. One of the Ranger X's, I've had 3 Ranger X planes. Those were before the Ranger 2000 that's popular now, and that was a huge plane with a very, very thick fuselage. And the first one I got has 2 or 3 crashes where for some reason it would just speed into the ground at full speed from a height of, say, 200 meters, that sounds like cars crashing into one another, you know, on the street, just bam, and it leaves a crater in the ground. And both times I just go there, pick up the carnage, clean off the fuselage from all the dirt, put new electronics in the plane, and next day it's flying again. This is not something you can do with any other plane. And it actually was a good flyer because they changed the wing profile. They changed the wing profile from the FPV Raptor, so that was a thick wing and it was load bearing, and it would not stow unless you really were trying to do this and slowing the plane down. So it was a very nice flyer up to this day. And I actually have a very unique model of it because at some point Volantex sent me a twin tractor model of the Ranger X, which was a factory prototype for me to test. And then when I was done testing it, and I said, all right, yeah, that is pretty good. Because the pusher version had that problem that you throttle up and it noses in during takeoffs, and if you want to try and throw it, it would just nose into the ground. So you have to do a rolling takeoff with while pulling on the elevator, correcting the torque row with the rudder. It was it was a pain in the ass to get flying, but it was a nice flyer once it was up there. The twin tractor version solved that, and then they decided not to release it, which was a shame, really, because it flew like a dream.
I was going to ask you, Hobby King sells something called the Phoenix line of planes. Have you seen them before? They look like they're made by Volantex. They have the plastic fuselage.
Yeah,
not the camera.
They are Volantex planes.
They are? Okay.
Yeah, but up to a point, Volantex was branding them differently for Hobby King. But at some point, I think Hobby King gave up on that because the FPV Raptors over on Hobby King were called First Star something. But it was the same plane. It was made by Volantex. It was just a huge order, and they got to pick their own name. You know, back when Hobby King was important, they could afford to do that.
Yeah, Hobby King has recently started to really, their thing is to go after this whole high-end foam market for scale planes. So you have to make these beautiful scale planes and just about any plane you want from World War II. And the detail is immaculate. But, I mean, they've gotten away from the things that made them famous, like the Bonsais and these Rangers, and not the Rangers, but the Phoenixes. And so
they were pretty much the only or the largest resource, or actually source, of these parts. There was RC Timer, and the rest were just sort of like Banggood sites, but they had very little, if any, RC parts. So, you know, RC Timer and Hobby King and maybe a few others like FPV Model, they had some parts, but their selection was very limited compared to what Hobby King had. Hobby King was like I think they had 80% of the market, maybe, I don't know. I'm just estimating because no one talked about anything else. Everyone was buying from Hobby King. And then at some point, I don't know why, but maybe during the boom of racing copters, Banggood got in on the action and actually started stocking up on crappy motors, crappy controllers, but they were selling tons of them. And people actually saw that they can sell tons of them and started pushing their products to Banggood. And I think that's sort of how that happened. And Hobby King just gave up. It felt like giving up. I mean, at some point, I used to order a few times a week from Hobby King. Now, I can't even find anything to buy there. I go on their website and I'm looking around and I'm just searching for something, just anything I like enough to buy, and there's nothing.
Yeah, like for example, Hobby King, the Bixler is like that was the plane we would recommend for people. You know, like if you want to start off with a real simple 5-channel plane where you can, it has a rudder, so if you're flying quads, you can get used to a rudder. Buy a Bixler, and I bought just out of spare parts. I decided to make another Bixler 1, and so I bought the fuselage and showed up in the mail as soon as I ordered it. And then I needed to get just 2 parts of the tail, the vertical and horizontal stabilizers, and it took a year and a half for them to show up back in the United States. So, I mean, I'm like, I just got it flying. It's been sitting there with an F411 wing since INAV 2.1. That's how long it's been sitting here for. But yeah, I don't know what's going on with them. And I know that they've had some issues, and they were trying to branch out and get into other things as far as 3D printing. They were trying to get into bikes. They're trying to get into trains and all sorts of things. And I kind of forgot what made them famous, which was the RC community.
They had a bit of a crazy time where they had loads of guns and all that kind of thing. They changed up the website, so it was horrible to use, and they went through a few phases.
It's unfortunate.
The good thing was that they had well-stocked warehouses around the globe.
Right.
So it was easy to get stuff because they actually had 2 warehouses in the. No, I think they still do, one in the UK and one in the Netherlands. But I don't know if anything's still available in there. I can barely find any batteries. I'm not big on scale planes per se, but I have been going on there and trying to find any EDF to, possibly get and fly, because I have been missing that. But there's nothing worth any interest.
So when did we start seeing these planes where they were designed to have cameras in them for, they actually, for example, the Ranger, there's like 3 different places you can mount an FPV camera on a Ranger.
Well, actually the FPV Raptors were FPV oriented models even back then. But I think they were some of the very few. There was the Titan that Ready-Made RC was making. No, the Titan was the the Titan was the fin wing one. The Anaconda was the Ready-Made RC one, and then Finwing had a few other models.
Penguin,
the MyFly Dream, the My Twin Dream by MFD, and I can't recall of many others. All of the others were like conversions of DIYs of other models. So there were choices, but they were sort of limited, especially compared to what we have today. Now, pretty much everybody has some FPV-oriented model, and actually, apart from, I can't recall the names now, Dynam RC are making some Warbirds, and these other guys, I don't know. Everyone else is doing FPV planes or mapping planes, actually. Right. Those have been popping out more often than not recently, and they started doing purpose-built mapping planes probably 2 years ago.
I think the first FPV plane I remember was the EPP FPV from Hobby King. That was like 2009, 2010. And then it moved on to like the Sky Hunter. Do you remember either of those? Maybe not. I might not even be getting the names right.
Sky Hunter and the Skywalkers. Yeah, those were FPV.
Yeah, the Skywalker X8. That was a big one back then as well.
Yeah.
Metaphorically and literally.
They were pretty good. These things would not stall, but they were slow as hell.
Yeah. Let me see if I can find the EPP FPV.
You're talking about the X8 for the Skywalker. It's a wing, and the thing is 2 meters, I believe. So it is a huge wing.
Yeah.
So it's like the Buffalo.
But it's actually funny that people associate Skywalker with those wings and that huge wing, when in fact they had a whole lineup of regular tail and rudder and elevator planes that were pretty good FPV rigs, but they were slow.
Here we go.
Right.
Oh, Yeah, that's what I was on about.
do
I don't
remember
know
that.
if they can see that. I don't know if it's actually working, this screen share.
I
Yes.
see it.
But yeah, that was like 10 years ago. That was the first FPV plane I remember.
Yeah.
And this is like a 2 meter wing or 1.8 meter wingspan, and it was using a terrible motor, and yeah.
It's like that
Simple
zone
times.
Yeah.
Simple times. Well, FPV planes nowadays are so intricate, it's ridiculous. They've got like wiring channels and
Yeah.
FPV canopies, and you've got like 3 to choose from depending on what mood you woke up in the morning.
You obviously saw the Alba bird, huh? Yeah. Sounds like that.
Okay. One thing on the Alba bird. After I released my video on the binary, and a lot of people went, okay, buy the Alba bird, it's pretty much the same size, but flies a lot better. And I got the binary because I saw that plane and I thought, God damn, that looks good. That was my only thought at that point. And then I go on and look at the Alba bird, and I'm just looking at it and I'm thinking, God, that looks like crap. Probably flies good, but it just looks like, I don't know, as far as looks go, and I was sort of in the mood to get something sort of scale looking of that type, so that's why I went for the binary. And I'm looking at the Alba bird, and it didn't click. I'm just looking at it, and I'm looking at it, and okay, it probably is the best flyer out there, but I'm looking at it, and I just don't like the way it looks.
Yeah, I bought one but painted it. So the idea is that I just don't like white planes. After about the 5th white plane in your garage, you're like, okay, everything looks like a foam cup these days in my garage. So if you buy it, it actually paints up really nicely, and you can have a lot of fun with it. So it's kind of a nice plane. The decals are a bit much on it, but it is really well made. I will say that. I've not really seen the binary, but the Alba bird is not horribly expensive and has channels for everything like you're discussing in there.
Yeah.
It's just, they really thought
I actually envy people that can afford to put in the time and effort into painting a plane, because that means they're going to use it for more than 10 flights.
Yeah.
Sadly, I don't have that luxury because things just roll so quickly around here. I mean, I've got right now around me, I can probably point to at least 2 or 3 new boxes just from this week. So I've got very few planes that I've kept through the years in service. Everything else just gets recycled and I move on. It's just, there's no other way.
We had Andrew Newton on coming up on a year ago, and he was telling me that he gets so many planes that all his friends don't want planes anymore. He has no one to give them to, practically. So it gets one of those things. There's so many. And right now we're at a low for as far as foam is concerned in the market. We're starting to see some new planes show up, but we had like a good year where it was hardly anything showed up here. And so I don't know what the reviewers did, but man, there's definitely now you have a lot to choose from. Before I'd like to move on into long range FPV and getting started into that, anything else you guys want to discuss about his background before we get into that? Darren's kind of looking at me. Mark, everyone's shaking their heads. Okay, great. So long range FPV, this is the one thing that I get asked about, or not. It was just like the comments I see where people are signing up for the group, what their expectations are. It's kind of like what we're trying to explain to people is, like, if you have a beautiful plane and you really love it and you want to put INAV in it, make that your second plane. Make your first plane something you don't mind crashing and rebuilding a bunch of times, because there's a lot to learn. But what I'm trying to get people into is the idea, like, you start off with something. It's like your first girlfriend, and there's reasons why you don't talk to her at the 10-year reunion. It's just kind of like you're making mistakes and you move on. But when it comes to getting into long-range FPV, there's like a continuum to get to that level. You don't start off here and get to long-range FPV in the same plane. So that is really one of the main reasons I want to have you here, is really kind of get into what does it really take to get beyond 15 kilometers out there and what it's like and what you're thinking. I mean, one other thing I will mention is that there was a time a few weeks ago that a young Mark Hoffman was standing in the middle of a field in Germany, and his beautiful Talon GT was gone into the dark phase where he can no longer see video transmission from it because it was on a mission. And so for about a half an hour, the plane was nowhere where he can see it. If it crashes, he had no idea where it crashed or anything else like that. And he was absolutely freaking out. So you must go through this quite a bit as far as, you're pushing your limits where your comfort level is just really way out there.
Well, actually, that's a funny thing. I think the last time, actually going through all these crashes that I mentioned with the FPV Raptors and the Ranger X, something inside of you breaks at some point, and you just stop caring, or at least you accept the fact that this thing is not coming back. The moment you throw it in the air, you need to be at peace with yourself and the world, and you need to have that mindset. I am ready to send those, I don't know how many dollars into the air, out into the distance, with the knowledge that I may never see it again. And once you get comfortable with that idea, and I've had to, because I've done some crazy shit. I mean, it's been quite a lot of years, and a lot of that. Like I used to go through planes like tens a day. I'd put 10 planes in the trunk of my car. I'd go to the flying field. End of the day, they're all into pieces. I spend most of the night putting them back together, and next day the same thing repeats. And that used to happen a few times a week for like a year or 2 years. No, probably was a year before I started getting into FPV, and then that kept on going with FPV planes and trying long range. And back then 5.8 wasn't what it is now. You had to use a separate power supply for the video system, because no matter what you did, you were just not able to filter out servos and motors and all that stuff. It was a complicated system. Nowadays you just put a Matic wing in there and go for it. It's nothing. It's nothing. I remember my first APM into the FPV Ranger. That was a wiring nightmare. Like, probably the wires in their weight more, or probably as much as the battery. So much copper in that plane. But getting back on topic, you have to crash planes in order to get over that feeling of, because a lot of people, I actually get contacted by a lot of people asking that exact thing. Well, I saw your video, I have no experience, but I want to get into long range. And it's tempting to actually, because nowadays that is shockingly easy. With absolutely no knowledge or very limited knowledge and very limited research, you can do that. You literally buy a Matic F405 or a 765, and you do a bit of soldering, because it doesn't require anything, spectacular in terms of soldering skills. You just have to solder a few wires or the pins, depending on how you want to go about it. And then you just plug stuff into it. That's it. You just plug pins into the autopilot. So basically, at some point, Matic might come out and say, well, let's make this even easier for you. This comes pre-soldered now. So that's gonna make it even easier. And you basically put it in the middle of the plane and start plugging wires into it, and you're done. And you can do an auto takeoff on the maiden flight as long as you've done all the checks to make sure it stabilizes in the right way. And I've actually done that. Maiden flight, auto takeoff, and I head straight for the mountain 13 kilometers away.
Wow. Hey, I was going to ask you, Nikola, do you need to take a break for a couple minutes here? We can put this on pause for a couple minutes if we need to. You say you get something to drink. Okay, good. I just want to make sure we don't kill you.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, great. Fantastic.
That feeling that you may risk to lose your plane, I know that very well. My first FPV plane was my AR ring. I still have the airframe, and the electronics is also still in use. But back then I tried the first time doing some autonomous stuff, and I played around with disabling phase-safe return to home, so it continues the mission, and a few crazy things on INAV. Yeah, and suddenly the plane, yeah, went off, and it was seen again 2.5 months later. So I got it back after a while, but yeah, that was a really, really bad feeling back then, because it was still my first plane, my only plane I had, so I had to start from scratch. Today, I have to say, I have around 8, 9, 10 planes laying around here. All have GPS, all have return to home. They all can do missions. Then they all can do long range as long as I watch the battery. And yeah, if I do some crazy stuff like recently with the Talon GT, doing 73-kilometer long autonomous mission. When it's gone, then it's gone. I have some spares, but it still hurts. I mean, the Talon GT is at the moment still my most expensive plane, with the brand new ZOHD battery in there. And yeah, it would hurt, but as long as I can continue flying, everything is fine.
I was going to say that if you're going to get into INAV, especially some people who have probably never heard of it before, I'm a guy who started off line of sight flying, and I will say that I have knocked on far less doors saying, listen, I think my plane crashed in your backyard, or it might be on your roof. And when the wind comes along, can you please let me know? It will fall in your backyard, and then my phone number is on the bottom of it. Call me up, and I'll come get it. You know,
that is such a good point, Steve. I think I've said before, I've never lost a plane doing FPV, but the amount of planes, it must be, 50 or so that I've lost over in people's gardens, on houses. There's still a plane. I know exactly where it is. It's on top of one of the houses in Southsea in Portsmouth, a big block of flats. I just can't get to it, you know.
Mark, there's a question.
That's all line of sight.
Yeah, there are actually 2 questions for Nikola related to each other. So especially for long range stuff, what is your preferred RC system you use right now?
Well, that is a tough question, because I'm actually using 3 systems at the same time. I've had very, very good success with the FrSky L9R receiver, which I still have in some play up to this day. And I've gone out to over 20 kilometers with that one, though granted with another antenna on the Taranis, not the stock one. Because
I should mention that the L9R is it's not a 900 megahertz. It's a
2.4 gigahertz long range receiver from FrSky that does not have telemetry. So right. Those of you that can't breathe without telemetry, this is not for you. Okay. So I really like that one because it's 2.4 and it's simple and it just works with the radio. You don't need any modules or other stuff like that. And then I do use the FrSky R9 system, and for me, from the start, that has worked absolutely brilliantly. But one key point here, I'm not using or trying to use the Flex firmware, and I don't have telemetry enabled, which is important for increasing the range, because all of the issues I've seen, even when they released it, people are trying to use Flex firmware and telemetry and trying to push it to 1 watt. Why would you need 1 watt? I've been out to over 25 kilometers on 200 milliwatts, and I've never felt the need for a telemetry link. And it still had more to go. I just decided to turn back. And that was actually done with a Talon GT. And I turned back because I thought I'm not going to have enough battery to come back. But I could have gone a few kilometers more. And then now I also have the Dragon Link, which is pretty brilliant. And actually the telemetry on it is a good thing. And as far as I can tell, there's not reduce the radio control range of the system. So I actually use that because I've now outfitted the XUAV for testing some mapping setups, and I've got this. So I actually need the telemetry link so I can link it up to Mission Planner on the computer and, you know, upload missions and just keep an eye on its flight path, because, you know, it's a grid that it has to go through. It just a lot better. But for flying, most people want to fly just regular FPV or long range, go chasing clouds with a telemetry link. That I do not understand. You've got an OSD, and depending on what video system you have, chances are that might last longer than your actual radio range, especially if you have an antenna tracker. So I've never thought, maybe if I had telemetry in this situation, it would have ended differently. I just never had that thought or, you know, trail of thought in my head. So I don't use telemetry, and I try to keep away from it, especially if I don't need it. It's not critical for anything. At least that's my opinion. Let's just disclaimer here. That is how I see things. I've not used telemetry with the R9 system, and I've never had issues with it. Perfect signal, perfect control, you know, 25 kilometers at 200 milliwatts. Some people would say, yeah, but TBS did 19 kilometers at 10 milliwatts. Fine. Just why would I want to fly at 10 milliwatts? I'm not testing a system. I'm just chasing clouds, and in the process, I'm going out to 25 kilometers. Yeah. I've got nothing to prove. I mean, I'm not selling the TBS system. They can do all the tests they need, probably under. And I'm doing all of this with the stock antennas that a lot of people say are crap and don't work. I've not replaced a single antenna on an R9 item that I have. Now, I do have to mention, though, that I've not updated the receivers or the module ever, like a few versions before the new Access over-the-air update.
February 2019.
Yeah. So I'm a few versions before February 2019.
Oh, okay.
Everything works brilliantly.
Darren's like a resident expert as far as the FRS guy. What do you think about what he's saying?
Well, I can sort of understand it. I mean, I've used the L9R without, and you have no choice with that. You don't get telemetry. Yeah. I mean, I'm not obviously flying to the extremes that Nikola is flying to, but yeah, I mean, you just don't have a choice. You can't have it on that receiver. So yeah, I can totally understand that. And again, if you've got a decent video link, you can put the GPS coordinates on that. So yeah, again, I can understand that. I mean, where you could miss out is potentially, say with the Lewis scripts that you get, where you can have your basically your flight display on your transmitter screen. So if you do lose your video, you could potentially fly back with instruments. So there's some advantages to it, but perhaps it's not essential.
Yeah, that is as long as you keep within the telemetry range, because for the most part the telemetry range is shorter than the radio range. So
yeah, totally. Yeah.
So basically, up to a point that works. You cross that threshold, and there's no more point to having that telemetry. That being said, I've noticed something else on the FR Sky receivers. I've managed to fly out to 8 kilometers with the X8R running telemetry and still having telemetry. But I've noticed something over the years which I felt very curious about FR Sky. Before FR Sky, I had a Spectrum DX8. And then after that is, a lot of people had a problem back then with Spectrum radios, and they did have a problem because they were updating them. I've had that thing, if it's working, don't touch it. I've had to update my Taranis a few times, not because I wanted to, but because I had to for various reasons. And luckily, I probably chanced upon some trouble-free firmwares or something. Or at the very least, I don't use the Taranis for anything. No Lua scripts, no logical switches, nothing of that, of those complications. I basically set up 5 channels, controls, and a mode switch, and that's it. I don't use telemetry. I don't use Lua scripts. I don't use the screen on my Taranis to fly the plane, and I'm actually still pretty happy with my first batch from the factory X9D, not the plus one, all back when they released it initially. So quite a few years now, and all I've replaced on it was the whole gimbals and the case, and that's it. It's perfect as it is. So basically, I use it in a very basic way. I just set up a few channels, and that's it. That's all the programming I'm doing in the radio. Everything else happens in the autopilot.
So,
but I just want to finish my trail of thought before I forget. After the Spectrum, I bought a Graupner MX12, which is a 6-channel system by Graupner. And back then, that was just when they were doing that deal with the Korean company, because the Korean company bought them at some point. But anyway, that was an amazing system. And that was actually the first system I was doing long-range flying with, because the receivers were actually capable of breaking over a kilometer, unlike the Spectrum stuff. That was, yeah.
That's so true today.
And still, yeah, I had pretty good results with the Spectrum and no fail-safes, even with the Hobby King Orange receivers, because I was not updating the firmware. All the people that updated their firmware started having problems, so eventually they all moved away from Spectrum after crashing a lot. I never did update it, but I never used it because the Graupner was a lot longer range. But the thing is, the Graupner had telemetry, actually, which was very useful. And the telemetry would go out to about 4.5 kilometers. We're talking stock antennas. The radio link would break at probably sometime past 6 kilometers, but that's when flying from within the city out. FR Sky, as far as I've seen, you can't have, like, the moment the telemetry breaks, the receiver automatically goes into failsafe. It does not separate the telemetry from the radio link. So you lose one, you lose both. Or, you know, the telemetry goes first, but then the whole thing just outputs a fail-safe state, and the autopilot's trying to turn you around. The Dragon Link does not work like that. The moment you lose the telemetry, nothing changes. You just radio link works, you know, as usual. So you still have that full radio range. The telemetry link is limited, but for FR Sky, for their telemetry receivers, at least on 2.4. That is one thing I've noticed, and I've always wondered if that was the same for the R9 system, because I've never tried telemetry there, because people were always complaining about shorter range antennas not being good and all of that. And I've always used the stock antennas. I'm flying on 868 megahertz version because I'm in the EU. Doesn't really make any difference around here, because in Bulgaria the 900 megahertz band is not used at all. But, you know, just for the sake of it, I'm flying 868, and the only thing I've done differently is I would put a heat ring on the antenna, which would essentially bring down the resonant frequency a little bit. So if they were designed for 915 megahertz, maybe I haven't tested it, but maybe I'm bringing it down just a little bit. But that's not the reason why I'm doing it. I usually have to make it stiffer to put it somewhere in the plane, and it wouldn't be going crazy like that all the time. So that's why I do it. But it probably, heat ring is dielectric, so it probably has some effect on the frequency, shifts it down a little bit. Probably helps, but I've had very good results with it. But that's one thing I've noticed about the telemetry on FR Sky. You lose the telemetry, and then the whole thing goes to hell.
So about the telemetry thing on 2.4, that's actually a good point. My biggest range with 2.4 was also with the X8R receiver. With telemetry, it cut off at 11.2 kilometers. Complete distance, but not with the stock antenna. I had replaced the antenna with a little bit longer dipole with it slightly more gain.
Okay. So an even higher gain than mine. Okay.
Yeah.
No, I hadn't lost telemetry that time when I flew out 8 kilometers. I just turned around at that point, but I am using the FrSky 5dB stick antenna on my Taranis. It's nothing fancy, no dipoles, no Yagis, just the FrSky 5dB antenna that they sell for the modules.
Oh, okay, so my antenna is a 2.4 dB, so it's really nothing special. So at least my biggest range was 11.2 kilometers, and as you said, the telemetry and the controlling cut off at the same time. The telemetry was just stuttering sometimes with a sensor lost or so, but it was mostly stable. But with the R9, the controlling definitely goes further than the telemetry link. The first time I did a long-range flight with R9 was at about, I think, 12 or 14 kilometers. But my R9 was defect, so I have put it in my Talon GT too tight into the foam, so it overheated the telemetry amplifier. It overheated and just died in flight. So from 8 kilometers onwards, I had no telemetry anymore at all, but controls, everything was fine, so that worked especially.
And it was still fine? The world didn't end because you didn't have telemetry?
Let's say I didn't trust the receiver anymore. And yeah, so I replaced everything, and then that was good. You talked about the video link before, that your video link maybe might outrange your control link, but that's on 2.4 gigahertz, right? Because I'm on 5.8 gigahertz video, and I'm really sure I will never get the range on 5.8 than I get with the R9 system.
Well, actually, I have... okay, let me think back. I'm not sure about the R9. No, actually, I have had a situation where for some reason I would get, 20 plus kilometers out. I'd get into, like, behind some trees relative to my position, and the radio would start cutting off, but you still have perfect video on 5.8, and that's a weird thing because, you don't expect that to be the case when using 5.8 video, and then that ends up performing better than the radio link. And I've actually had that happen with the R9 system while playing around with it and testing it in one of the directions. But it was curious to see it fail-safing, and the video was actually still good, and I could see the plane, I could see the OSD, and it would just jump to fail-safe for an instant as I was, and I can see the tracker pointing straight at the tree. So, no surprises there. But, having an antenna tracker, while we're on that topic, with a good directional antenna does help get that video signal out ways longer than possibly, depending on what you're using, than the radio signal.
What I did recently was, and that was a point where I really loved to have a telemetry. I was flying with the Talon GT to make just some area shots, just some, a little bit filming the environment in 4K and all that stuff with the GoPro in the nose. And I just didn't have my antenna tracker with me, just my goggles and the little patch antenna. But what I actually did was I used my phone and the telemetry viewer app. So I am able to see on my phone on a map where the plane is actually at right now and where it is pointing. So it's really nice to have the telemetry data and see on a map where your plane is, to plan some routes and to look on the map where you actually are. Because only from the video feed, if you are maybe 500 meters or even higher up, it's hard to orientate from that perspective. You often don't really know where you are at the moment. And that's really helpful then if you have telemetry on your phone, on a map, or to actually see where you are.
I have a problem exactly with relying on that sort of thing, because then at some point telemetry goes out, and what do you do?
It doesn't have to be relied upon. You can just need to
return to home. Yeah.
Yeah, I hit the return to home button.
Yeah. My first long range, like for the plane, not for the link flight, was I don't know, 6 years ago. Actually between Christmas and New Year's, I decided to put my FPV Raptor, which was by then, you know, a pretty decent flying machine. I ironed out the CG and all of that. I just knew I had to keep the speed up, and I decided to take off from the side of the highway at some point and just fly it, let it do a mission along the highway up to the next city over, which was 60 or 70 kilometers away. And I do that, and I was supposed to be driving with the car along with it. My father was driving. I was sitting on the passenger seat with, you know, laptop with telemetry running, video link running, and all of that. And plane takes off, and probably 2 kilometers down the highway, we go into that thick fog, and the plane's actually on top of the fog, but the sun is so bright there that you basically see only white. And back then, I don't exactly remember, but I don't think I had an OSD. So basically, I'm just looking at a white screen that's supposed to be the video feed. It was perfect because the plane is literally 400 meters away, but I'm not exactly certain where I am relative to it, and I'm only seeing white because it's flying close to the fog, and the cameras back there were shit. So, you know, I'm seeing overexposed image of mostly white, and this thick fog that just wouldn't dissipate. So at some point, because there was headwind, the battery runs out sooner than anticipated. So it's not going to reach its end point where it was supposed to do a descent and circle around until I can get there and land it manually. So I decided to take control of it because the telemetry was the only thing that was actually working properly, but that was on the laptop. I was looking at it on the laptop. The video was too, but like I said, I'm just looking at a white screen and that's it, with no other sense of direction. So I take it, switch it to fly-by-wire mode. That would be something like the angle mode on INAV. And I start gliding it down with very little or no throttle. And because I had set it to go up to 400 meters above the takeoff point, but at that point I did not think of the fact that that takeoff point was higher than where I am now. So I'm thinking, all right, it's coming down, it's 400 meters, and it goes down to 0, and I'm thinking, yeah, plus and minus 10 meters, you know, barometers do drift, so I should be landing anytime now. And then we go minus 10, minus 20, minus 100, minus 200, and I'm like, okay. So now I'm not exactly sure where I am relative to the plane, and I have absolutely no idea how high I am. And gliding it that way, I almost made it to the landing point, and I tried to keep it just parallel with the highway. And maybe that was, I ended up landing on a balcony in a factory because going through the fog, you know, I went from all white to all gray, and camera was all wet. So basically at some point I just saw a darkening of the frame, and I'm thinking, okay, I should be reaching the ground. And I did exactly what you would do before landing. You flare it, and and then it disappeared all of a sudden, and I spent a few hours searching for it. And I had taken one of my copters with me, and I managed to find it on top of that factory on one of the balconies. And when reviewing the footage, was actually I was headed right for the windows on the first floor, and that flaring that I did actually made it go up to the second floor balcony and it hit with one of the wings. It hit a column that was right on the edge of the building, did a 360 spin, and just dropped down dead center on the balcony. Only damage was the wing hitting that column and nothing else. And there were windows right in front of it. And the guy, there was some guy there, security, he just couldn't believe it. And I went to him and I asked him, have you seen an RC plane around here? And he was like, what? And he wouldn't believe me. And I took the copter up, and we actually saw the plane on the balcony, and his jaw dropped, and he was like, oh crap. There really is a plane there. And I waited for somebody to come and open up, because that was like on Sunday between Christmas and New Year's. There's nobody there. Waited for somebody to come out to the factory to open it up and bring the plane down. So that was my first long range sort of experience driving along with the plane. But I think that was the point where I completely lost any sense of urgency or worry when these things were happening. Since then, a host of crazy stuff has happened, and I'm just like an immovable rock. I mean, I feel this annoyance. I feel something's about to go bad or wrong, and I feel this annoyance from the fact that I'm gonna have to be bothered to go out and look for a plane, maybe. Not from the fact that it's gonna crash. I mean, crashes, I've accepted they're inevitable, so that's not really bothering me. I'm usually more bothered about losing the camera and the video that's on the camera, because that's what's valuable to me. The plane itself can be replaced, but that video on that SD card. So when the crosswind actually went missing, I was so annoyed by that fact that's why I didn't go looking for 9 months. And only then, because of peer pressure, I actually got up and went up there to see if, there's any chance it would still be there. It wasn't, but, a lot of things have happened, and you just have to stay calm and not care. I mean, that's how you get through this.
Hey, Mark, is there another question?
Yes, there was also another question about the controlling, especially just in a recent TBS live stream. Trappy talked about you and your channel, and he was asking in the stream, or he was wondering why you don't use actually Crossfire, and if you contact him personally, he offered to provide you a Crossfire setup.
I think the exact wording he used was he'd sort you out. So whether that was a threaten or whether it was he'll give you some Crossfire gear, it's up for you to interpret, I guess. Threat, sorry.
Actually, a few people have mentioned that he's been mentioning me in the maybe past 2 live streams. I'm not aware of where these live streams are or when. I've not seen them still. Although maybe someone somewhere shared a link, which I still haven't opened.
Yeah, I don't by any means watch all of their TBS Couch live streams, but I just so happened to be watching it when he said it.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, if you can provide a link, because for the life of me, I have no idea where I can find him.
Yeah, I'll send you a link to it.
Or how I can contact him.
It sounds like a good idea. Free Crossfire gear isn't something to sniff at.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. I can test it, sure. No problem. But why? Why? Because there's a ton of stuff. Now, Crossfire would be adding a 4th one. So now I have to be proficient in 4 systems so I can fly all and use effectively all of my planes. And, it's what I do. But still, there comes a time when you try to simplify a little bit and streamline the process. Otherwise, it's too much. That's the reason why I actually keep postponing going back to INAV, because I'm very comfortable with Arduplane, and for me personally, it has been stupid reliable. The base plane flying and stabilizing and return to home code of the Arduplane, I've never, ever ever have known, seen, or remember a situation where that thing has not worked. Ever. INAV, my first association with INAV is my memory of it trying to kill 2 of my planes a few years back when I decided to try it. Exactly one of them, exactly in the manner described recently by somebody, that it just randomly disarmed mid-flight. And that was when I initially built the Nano Talon back then when they released it, when Zoc released it with something running INAV. I think it was an F3 controller, Omnibus F3 Pro. And that thing disarmed a few times over the course of a few flights. I was pretty high up, so I had time to save the plane. And then it tried to kill the Believer a few times, and that was it. I mean, going after the Nano Talon was, you know, not a big problem. Going after the Believer, no, that was a big problem for me, because that is a huge plane and I rather liked it.
Yeah, I think the try of INAV killing your planes, if you say it has randomly disarmed, that may be the issue Darren and I and a few others of the group have investigated. It's actually a bug in the FR Sky system. It's not a problem with INAV itself. It just seems that maybe autopilot has better handling and of that issue, so it doesn't cause a disarm there. I've never tried it. I mean, I have autoplane now on one plane. Maybe I can test it. That's actually a good point. But mainly the issue comes from the FR Sky system.
Okay, possibly, but that was not the only thing. The drifting horizon was another thing that was that was a shock. That was a genuine shock to me, because Arduplane, I've never, ever since I've used Arduplane, all the way back to APM, I don't know what, when I started using it, you let go of the stick after a turn and the plane goes back to a perfect horizontal state. After a long turn, you release the stick and the plane just stays banked. And I'm like, what the heck? And you have to actually pull it the other way so it would, sort of right itself. Then you release the stick. Then maybe it will go back to being level. And there was on the Believer, I had an issue with return to home not working properly. It would cut the throttle. Plane would go into a tip stall because the Believer does do that. It is a good plane, but it does like its speed. And I've seen a lot of other people complaining about that. And for the life of me, I cannot ever imagine or remember having any issues of the sort with Arduplane. So as far as code goes, for me, Arduplane is a lot more mature. It's been out there for a lot longer, and a lot more effort has been put into it in the plane department. And it just shows. At least for me, it shows. And I know it. It's easier for me to work it. INAV tried to actually fly the binary with INAV, but wasn't INAV's fault what happened. But still haven't put that controller into another plane to test it, which I might do because the that ugly Ichin thing arrived the other day.
Air loader.
Yeah, it's edgy and ugly and has 3 motors on it. I don't know.
Yeah. And tip stalls quite badly.
Yeah. But you better love it.
Don't say this too loud.
Right. So maybe not getting an INAV then.
Yeah,
well,
I think just a quick thing, Steve. I think the horizon drift in INAV, it's some kind of signature over the last past years. It is really an issue, especially if you want to have a smooth and stable flying cruiser. And if you make long turns, yes, that can lead to a horizon drift that can annoy you after a while. The biggest issue is if you have a more acrobatic and agile plane and you rip around, sometimes the horizon can even go vertical. And Autoplane does better here. I had a talk with Pavel Spichatsky recently about that again, and he said that Autoplane actually uses a very, very advanced filtering system to keep the gyro signal as clean as possible and to detect motions better than INAV can. You can actually fix the horizon drift by yourself, but it's some work. You really have to set up the filters right and use this IMU ignore rate setting in the command line. It can work. I have an on my Dart 250G, I found the perfect settings for my setup, and I really can go acrobatic. I can fly inverted, rolls, loops, everything. And if I go back, the horizon has, if it goes really bad, a drift of 2 or 3 degrees maybe, and it really fast settles back. So it's barely visible on the screen, or even you barely feel it even if you go back to angle mode. So it can work, but it needs some effort to achieve that.
What I was going to say about INAV is that it pretty much was a derivative off of Clean Flight and pretty much was designed for quad pilots. So I think when we started this group back in 2018, all of a sudden there's a lot of interest in fixed wing, and we had Powell on 6 months ago, and he said that what they do is they don't really get paid as developers. I mean, this is all free time. So he works on what he feels like working on. Whereas when you look at Autopilot, they actually get government, United States government money sorted through to pay for help for that.
They have they have a lot of developers now, a very large team.
Right. So, but what's happening is they're coming out with INAV 2.6, and Powell says fourth quarter. It was a month out. Now it's going to be sometime in November, he's saying. But that's going to take care of a lot of really neat things as far as fixed wing planes are concerned. So if you can go back to INAV, I'd say wait till 2.6 comes out.
All right. Yeah, well, might as well, because the way I see it, I'm probably not going to put it into another plane at least for a month or two. So, you know.
I'm also following all the updates of 2.6, and there's already a good list of features I've picked out, and I want to make a video about them. And there are really a lot of nice tweaks, especially for navigation stuff, to make smoother turns. That's a big thing on Autopilot, to have smooth and stable turns without gaining or losing altitude. There are a lot of tweaks in 2.6, so I will also forward the list to Darren, so maybe you make also a video about it in English. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that version.
Okay, but one thing that INAV, I don't know about INAV, but Betaflight has better over Ardu is the copter bits, or at least the small copter bits. I'm not sure how that thing would work on a larger copter, but the small ones, the Ardu copter code is pretty much shit. And also compared to the DJI controllers.
Yeah,
if I had to pick out a controller for a copter, would definitely not be Ardu Pilot.
Yeah, that's also some experience I had in the past. I have a 10-inch or 9.5-inch copter over here, just as a DIY project to carry a GoPro and have a pen and tilt and all that stuff. And one issue I had with that one, maybe one of the reasons, is that the frame is completely 3D printed. So it's completely my own design and 3D printed with tube arms and all that stuff. And the biggest issue I had with it, as soon as there is some strong wind or the copter is flying forward really fast, so there's a lot of airflow over the frame, for some reason it suddenly starts to climb up like crazy. And if it's in a mission, it pauses the mission, levels out, descends again to mission level, and then continues and does that all over again. And I think that only happened after I did the Autopilot auto-tune. With the stock pits, it was flying like shit, but it was not freaking out, at least. I'm not sure what's wrong with that. Maybe some pits...
is it like an oscillation thing?
Yeah,
like that?
That's what I thought, that after the auto-tune, maybe the D-term or so was too high, and then it started to oscillate and wind up because of the wind.
Well, I've dealt with that 5 or 6 years ago, so nothing new there. I guess they haven't. I think it was some issue with the barometer as well, and air getting in some weird way into the flight controller.
Yeah.
But that's been happening for a long time.
Yeah. At least on that setup, for this reason, I have put the flight controller on a more or less vibration damped platform.
Yeah.
So the flight controller is above the propellers actually, so it doesn't get some dirty air from the propellers. But at the end, it's a Pixhawk 2.4.8, this clone flight controller. But now I flashed PX4 on it, and I will test it with PX4 instead soon. And maybe that works better than autopilot. It has the same base, but it's much more advanced, especially for navigation stuff, and so more cleaned.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to do is, because we're going to run out of time if we don't get to this, is I really wanted to help focus in on what it takes for someone to get into long-range FPV, someone who's new to this. Let's just pretend they're flying INAV and they've figured out how to get INAV working on an AR wing. Where do you go from there?
Okay, that's for me.
Yes.
Can I put something in first?
Well, depends if you want to keep with INAV, honestly, I have no idea.
Let's just say...
Or you mean in terms of gear?
Gear, right.
Well, for the most part nowadays, video transmitters, pretty good, all of them. And most of them have pretty good filtering, which is a huge step up from back when I started, where, you know, the slightest servo movement on the same line would just cause the whole thing to go kaboom. It was ridiculous, but either way, I'm actually using a lot of AKK controllers, I mean video transmitters, because they've been pretty good. They've been pretty good, and their filtering is pretty good. The only one I've had problems with was the Oscar's backpack video transmitter, which was designed to fit on the back of some runcam camera. That was the only one that was not properly filtered for some reason, but all the other ones, micro or not, I just plug them directly to, even if I plug them directly to the battery, they do pretty darn good job of filtering. As far as camera, for long range, you can actually use a video out of a HD recording camera, because that delay at 2 kilometers up and 30 kilometers out makes no difference. It's not racing. It's not a racing copter. I get a lot of people coming from racing copters, and they're like, "Okay, what do I need?" And I'm saying any camera, and they, well, what about the delay? Trust me, when you're not racing gates, delay doesn't matter that much. We're not talking 2 seconds, so it's milliseconds either way. So it makes no difference all the way up there. And then you have to decide what frequency you want to be on. I still haven't. 1.3 is really, really tempting, but by God, those filters, notch filters, soul filters, I don't know what kind of other filter, that is off-putting in a very big way. And I really think that if manufacturers like Matic release that 1.3 system, but that still needs to have, I don't know if that needs to have, or the R9 system needs to have a notch filter added. I'm not exactly clear on that thing, but people still talk about manually adding other components to that system to make those two work together, which to me sounds ridiculous. My goal generally, and has always been, is to go out and try and find items that are readily available for people to buy easily, that do not require modifications on such a level as to adding filters or possibly SMD components and stuff like that to make something work. I remember back in the day with the big 1.3 gigahertz systems, you had to open up the receiver and actually remove a component and solder a new one in its place. And this is outside of the capability of, like, especially nowadays with all the racing copters and a lot more people coming into this, but mostly because of the fun of it, not because they're technically adequate or prepared to deal with something like this. So my goal has always been to try and find stuff that you can just purchase, plug together, and it would give you decent results without you having to do, you know, a lot of DIY soldering, desoldering, modifications, programming, debugging, all of that at some point I have been through to make something work, which is always a pain, and that actually limits the number of people that are gonna go for that product. I mean, the moment you start doing DIY on that scale, people are no longer interested, because that kind of complication is too much for a lot of people to deal with. They want something simple. So basically what I'm doing, okay?
Just about the Maytag 1.3 gigahertz system. I just recently saw a video from another YouTuber who has compared his old 1.3 gigahertz ground station receiver with the Maytag one in his goggles, and at a specific range he had, just out of nowhere, a very strong signal noise in his video feed. While the ground station receiver, the old one, was everything was fine, and then he realized that his crossfire system was actively interrupting his video signal, because the crossfire antenna, if he has the receiver in his hand, is very close to the goggles at this point. And as soon as crossfire ramps up the power level on a bigger range, he suddenly gets noise into it. So that's a big problem. His ground station receiver had a complete metal casing around, so it was shielded from the outside, but these goggle modules are naked boards under a plastic cover. There's no shielding, nothing, and that was a big problem. So 1.3 gigahertz on the goggles is actually a pretty big problem if you use long range 900 megahertz systems.
Was that Adam G?
I think so.
Yeah.
Not only 900 megahertz, the 433 has an issue with 1.3, 2.4 has an issue with 1.3. So basically, any type of radio control system you want to try and use, you have to do some DIY, you know, encase receivers into shielding and, you know, stuff that you actually have to go out and do research on. That will never be your first choice or your go-to system. That needs working up to, once you're done with the, you know, simply putting a plug and play stuff, if you decide you want more. But right now I'm just more all right, let me just finish that sentence and you can ask that. I'm more concerned about finding the reasonable limits of an easily accessible 5.8 video system, and so far that has been 32 kilometers with about maybe $70-80 worth of video gear, receiver, transmitter, and antennas. And actually, I've had the best result with the $3 AKK Pagoda antennas. Any other Pagoda, even antenna that I've tried to use with the triple patch array, has given me worse results than the $3 AKK antennas, the super cheap, simple ones that AKK sells. I've had the best results with those. A triple feed patch array, an AKK receiver, that 32 kilometers was with the Dominator, supposedly running 2 watts. But I have been told from people who have done measurements on that it's actually not outputting 2 watts on all of the frequencies. It ranges from 900 to 2.5 or 3 watts, depending on which frequency you're in. And then on the ground, I have an FR632 receiver, which was in itself expensive back in the day, but that was, yeah, that's the one I'm using, exactly. But it's no longer manufactured. But from my experience with other receivers now, pretty much any modern build 5.8 gigahertz receiver you get, it's a sensitive, good one with decent filtering to get the job done. So you're looking at, okay, at most $100 in antennas, receiver and video transmitter, but you do have to have the antenna tracker to get the optimal result. 1.3 you can, you know, you can do it up to a point without an antenna tracker. For 5.8, directional antennas get very directional very quickly, so it's a good idea to have that and have it working and pointing accurately. That would get you out there. And thanks to my flight dream now and the crossbow mini, that has now gone down to $160, which is pretty acceptable and reasonable given what it can do.
So sorry, I just wanted to go back and reference the Maytech 1.3 that Mark was talking about, because that review was for the V2, which is supposed to have a notch filter on it. So the fact that he had interference with Crossfire is a bit weird. But I know that the RMRC receiver on the standard ground station, it was fine. That does have the notch filter on, but it's just a screw-on thing with SMA connectors, so it's not any internal soldering. It is a simple thing to do. Mentioning is it the crosswind tracker? That leads on to a question. Sorry, the crossbow. It looks really cool, actually. But I saw your video on it. It does look cool. Where was it? Glenn asked, are you using the Telefly modules to get the data to the tracker, or how are you doing that with your builds?
Well, recently I've had a problem with the tracker. At some point during one of my flights, the wind knocked it down. And ever since that point, it stopped like seeing packets or a video link. The video goes through it, it just doesn't detect it for some reason. And I'm waiting on a replacement board for it, so I can, something must have happened on the inside, I don't know. But I recently got the Telefly working, like getting the data rather than having a GPS connected to it, getting the data from a telemetry output, a Mavlink telemetry output on the autopilot, which actually works pretty good, because that way you can, if you're using an autopilot that does not have an integrated OSD, like a regular Pixhawk, not the Matek boards, you can actually use the Telefly as the OSD, because then it has all of the data that usually the Mavlink outputs. So it's showing you speed, altitude, coordinates, all of that, current, voltage, all of that you get on the MyFlight Dream OSD, and that's a nice one. But yeah, in some of my models I do use it. I have the crosshair autopilot in one of the planes, so that does not require the Telefly module, because the autopilot itself sends that information because the video signal goes through it. I know people I know Charles has made these updates recently to be able to use it on the ground with smart port and telemetry from the ground and stuff like that, but I've not tried that. I know people are running it that way and it works. Personally, I've not tried it because I don't use telemetry that way from the radio. So it would be a huge effort on my side to get telemetry working reliably through the radio and then output it to the tracker in order for me to actually try that. So I just haven't gotten around to it.
Just in case you want to try that, what I did is, in my opinion, the most reliable option. You fly on Taranis, right?
Yeah.
So what I did is I just used an HC05 Bluetooth module and put it with an inverter inside the Taranis on the serial port that is there. So Yeah, you're looking.
See, that's the thing I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I'm not willing to do that. So why should I expect other people would be willing to do it as well? And in my view, the Telefly Tiny, yeah, it's $25, but then you forego all of that. You have to get the Bluetooth module, you have to get the inverter, you have to program it, you have to do that, you have to wire this in. You just get the Telefly module and you plug it in the plane and you're done.
Yeah, but then you are relying on the telemetry link of that module, and it has to be the same range as your radio
relying
control.
on the video link.
Ah, okay. So
or the packets.
What I was always wondering with that, I think it uses the audio subcarrier to actually transmit the.
No, it's using the video one.
Yeah, it overlays it on top of the video.
Yeah, it. No, it's a teletext sort of thing.
Yeah.
That it does. So, used to be audio in the old tracker up to version 4. Version 5 moved it to the video.
Okay, and what happens if the video signal gets weak? It's not broken up, it's just very weak, like very grainy, but you still see your environment. What happens then with the telemetry?
Well, up to a point, grainy is not a problem because it's still getting valid packets every now and again. You get a valid packet and it would correct the position to rotate towards the plane. It gets too grainy and it no longer can decode that teletext adequately. Then it just starts beeping that it's lost the signal. The moment you get a valid packet, it would reacquire the position and rotate accordingly.
Okay, so it works best, I think, if you fly straight away from you, because if you fly in a big arc around you, then it may completely lose you after a while.
Well, yeah, depends how you fly. The good thing is that as long as it has a valid signal, the tracker itself is the servo is stiff and you can't actually rotate it. That's how the old one would work. I can't recall if the crossbow mini works the same way, but as long as you have a valid signal, you can't move it by hand. The moment it loses the signal, you can actually freely rotate the tracker around manually, so you can possibly find the plane just in case it has gotten out to the side and the antenna is no longer pointing at it.
Okay.
But I've never actually felt that to be a limitation, because sometimes when I'm testing something, I do fly out and back in a straight line, but a lot of the times when I'm just chasing clouds, I'm all over the place. And I'm not trying to be out one way, back the same way, or when I'm flying up to the mountain and then I'm coming back, gliding sort of down the top of it, as it's sloping down. I mean, that's, I don't know, probably 10, 12 kilometers of horizon that I go through, and I've never felt that to be a limitation. And so far, I've not used a system with telemetry that can go out over the range of the 5.8 video system. So I think, okay, I better move to telemetry because that has longer range. And even if the video signal gets low, that would keep the tracker pointed, especially if you go to 1.3 gigahertz. I mean, I've seen people go out to over 200 kilometers on that frequency, and that's 200 kilometers of valid signal. So basically you will be getting those packets. I haven't seen a telemetry link working that way. The other thing I've been thinking, which depending on what you do though might be a good idea, but you can't go too high, is if you use 3G or 4G module to send that telemetry link back. So as long as you have the mobile network cell coverage, doesn't matter, that thing would still point the tracker in the direction of the plane. But for that, you have to stay pretty low. At some point, you're just gonna go behind the horizon. So telemetry link or not, just the antenna wouldn't be seeing the plane physically. It would be like flying behind a mountain.
Right. So wanted to ask you, when we're getting to, all right, so someone's getting started and they're moving into this, and this one thing I picked up in your videos as well is that you don't send a plane out 30 kilometers. Hey, I'm just going to send it out. You test your system. It looks like I was watching, you're sending out 20 kilometers, then 25 kilometers. Then, so if someone who's new, maybe it's 5 kilometers.
I would never recommend a beginner to send it out 20 or 25 or even 5 kilometers for one single reason. Well, depends on his experience flying planes. Usually I ask, that's the first thing I ask. Do you have any experience flying planes? If they do, then sure, they can do whatever. Because they're asking me for a setup that would get them out that far. And I've tested stuff and I have a pretty good idea what would work. So I can give them that setup. The thing here is for them to actually know how to fly the plane without an autopilot. And I think for me, that has been very important on a number of occasions where I've had to fly a plane in a ridiculous way, 15 kilometers out or something like that, even in manual mode. Because at one point, it was during the winter, I had a Skywalker Eve 2000, and I just thrown it in the air, and it was 10 or 12 kilometers up and a good deal higher. I was trying to get to some clouds, and at some point it just started flying very weirdly and went into a spiral. I had to switch to manual mode to take it out of that spiral, and I had to fly it that way back. And while coming in for the landing, I noticed the 2 aileron servos hanging from the cables below the wings. So both servos came out of the servo beds for the ailerons. So basically that was tail only recovery from a tip stall and the flight back, all in manual modes. It's like flying a regular line of sight plane, only looking through the camera, and then landed it that way. So you can actually pretty easily, without any experience, do long range. You buy the tracker, you buy the antennas, you buy the video transmitter, you buy the receiver, you buy the autopilot. Nowadays, especially with the MyFlyDream autopilot, any idiot can plug those connectors together because they're color matched. The connectors themselves are matched. You don't have to cut a single wire or do a single bit of soldering work on it. You just get it, plug it all in, and the best thing about it is that you can do all the programming, which is pretty simple. There's actually nothing to do on it via the OSD, so you don't need a computer even, and you can get it flying, and you can do an auto takeoff, and it would work, and you can send that plane 20 kilometers out without having flown a single minute in your life. You can do that. Nowadays, that's doable and that's possible, and that's going to work. And you can do it. Thing is, what do you do if something goes wrong? And I always go from that point. I can always recommend to anybody, see, any idiot can do it for $1,000. But what do you do when something goes wrong and you're 15 kilometers out and you have to play that, and you have to fly that plane back yourself, not the autopilot? What do you do then?
So my question is, do you think that they've made it too easy for people to be able to do this long range? I know you're
yes.
Obviously a proponent of having everything simple, plug it together. But is it a point where it's too easy that people can get into it without experience?
Well, that's the whole point of it, isn't it? To make something as easily accessible as you can make it, so more people can use it, so you stand to earn more money. Because at the end of the day, all of this boils down to that. You creating a product that is easy to use, somebody using it easily and spreading the word around, so other people would want to come in and use it. So you make the money, you make a new product that's even easier to use, even more people start using it. That's the whole deal with that's how it started with the racing copters, because racing copters were heaps easier and simpler to do than large video copters or FPV planes. Because you, most of the time, like 99, if not 100% of the time, you fly it no more than 100 meters away from you. It's fun. You do all these crazy stunts in the air. And at some point, after you buy a good charger and a good radio, all of the rest costs nothing. You can build a copter within $100, and it's easy to put together. You just bolt the motors on there, do a few solders, a lot of things. Actually, Each-In and a lot of other brands actually sell that already built. You just take it out, plug the battery in, and go flying. So the goal here is to make it more accessible. And actually, I did notice through the rise of racing copters something which was pleasant, at least for me, because I'm okay tuning PIDs on a plane because I don't have to do a lot of it. Planes are pretty simple, and you can get decent results with very small amount of tuning. Auto-tune works relatively good with satisfactory results. Tuning on copters is not quite the same thing. And when I first started trying to fly with Beta Flight, and before that Claim Flight, before that Base Flight, because I've been flying, you know, all the way back to the first NAS 32 boards, the genuine ones, and they used to run Base Flight. It was never good. You buy something off the shelf, it was never good. It needed tuning, it needed stuff to be replaced. At some point, you buy something, and the moment you touch it, you actually ruin it. You take it out of the box, and it's smooth as butter. And that makes it even easier for the end user. And even with the long range stuff, you buy all your gear from MyFly Dream, tracker, autopilot, everything plugs together and works flawlessly. The only more difficult thing that you probably have to do is put the plane together, because they don't sell it already assembled. Although Charles did mention that he had a plan to start offering it as a kit, built up and equipped for a 4-hour flight, like the Crosswind Mini. So, you know, in that case, you just order something that you literally just plug together. You don't have to solder, you don't have to read, well, maybe you have to read a manual briefly, but that is a very simple system to use. Maybe not the cheapest one, but that, you know, simplicity to cost, that is among the top ranking ones. That is made for idiots. I mean, genuinely. I know exactly how much work and effort I put into programming it via the OSD menu and plugging stuff in, and it takes literally 5 minutes. Just have to arrange the stuff, plug it in, and it's working. You can do an auto takeoff immediately.
The only level above that is if people go into the next electronics shop, buy a DJI drone, and then fly over cities or other areas that are prohibited.
I don't know if a DJI drone is considered long range, although they do get a decent amount of range out of those HD systems. That is granted. And also a DJI drone is not a plane.
Yeah, of course. But I mean, if you take the Mavic 2 or Mavic Pro 2, for example, you put it into FCC mode, and then you can fly 10 kilometers out. But the problem...
That can do over 10 kilometers, yeah.
Yeah, but the problem then is...
That's still long range? I consider 10 to 15 kilometers sort of mid-range. Long range once you get past 20 kilometers.
I mean, my point is not that is it long range or is it not. My point is that it's sometimes even too easy to get onto that stuff for people who don't have the experience. I mean, there are so many reports of crashed drones, or mostly DJI drones or some off-the-shelf stuff, people fly out long distance, they ignore the battery warning, I have enough or so, and then they have to crash land somewhere. I mean, last year there was a report just near my region here where a drone landed on the freeway. So, and then it's not funny anymore.
Yeah, so as long as you bring that up, the one thing I'll say is, like, when we watch your videos, I don't see you flying over population beaches, and I don't see you I'm talking Nikola here. I'm not seeing you flying over major cities. And when you look at most of the videos in our group, you'll see people flying over farmlands and things like that. And there's a reason for that. First is to keep people safe and to keep property safe. But when no one's out there, it also means that there's no radio interference out there, so you can go further.
Yeah.
So that what we're trying to do is make sure, like, when people get these planes, when you're talking going out 30 kilometers, you're not talking doing it at exactly 300 or 120 meters up or 399 feet up. You're way up there.
Or maybe I don't know. You have to get into those curve calculators to actually determine if you can go 30 kilometers out at 300 meters. But I think that would be a pretty impressive achievement if you can manage it. I don't think curvature is going to allow you to do that.
Right.
Unless you got a long ranger who's a flat earther.
Yeah.
There we go, problem solved.
So
no,
yeah,
I think the only development from here on into planes, like to a scale comparative to the DJI copters, would be if DJI come out with a plane. You know.
I think they're working on it. What we're trying to do is make sure, like, when people live in major cities, like, there's reasons why you're not supposed to be up at, over 300 meters and flying around up there. And it's because, and that's 1,000 feet in the United States, it's because there's air traffic up there. And, we have enough problems as it is right now with the FAA here in the United States if they get reports of seeing our planes flying around as they're trying to land at the various airports, and there would be, it makes things a lot worse for us. So if you're going to do this, go out places, fly over the ocean, go out to the desert, go places where you can, or as like Nikola does, fly over mountains where it's, the plane goes down, you might hurt a tree.
Yeah. Actually, Mark did now mention the Parrot Disco, but that works actually pretty good out of the box. But tell me one person that is still running it stock.
I had a friend who had one, but he's a little.
Who knew somebody who had a third cousin?
No. He got rid of it after the original battery was not okay anymore, and he didn't even want to buy a third-party battery. So if the battery would be okay, then he would still run it completely stock. But yeah, I know very, very small number of people actually even getting one, because they are more.
It was actually pretty cheap. End of the line, it was pretty cheap for what it was. But I don't know a single person that is running it stock and doesn't have the 4G module in it, or trying to run ArduPlane in it, or whatever else. So it's not, apparently not the perfect product that would suit every need.
The reason why the Paradisco just wasn't successful was the initial price. I think these, what was it, $1,800 or so at the beginning on launch, and then even the drop to $1,200. No one would buy a phone plane you can only use if you have a landing area for it. No one would buy that for that price.
Well, actually, it didn't require much of a landing area as far as I can remember, but when they discontinued it, you could actually buy it for around 300 euros, if I'm not mistaken.
You can still, yeah. So sometimes you get some, but be prepared.
The main problem with planes, and why they still haven't caught up in terms of popularity to the DJI drones, is first because nobody is offering, an all-in-one, perfectly built and working solution. And then there's the thing with the speed. A plane is constantly moving. There's no pause. You can't just let go of the sticks and it would stop and wait for you to make up your mind what you want to do, or to take a sip from your beer. You can do that eventually, but you have to constantly be aware of the fact that you're moving, and there's no stopping that. And I think it is entirely possible that if DJI come out with a plane, I think it might be a VTOL, because that would make it a bit safer for the mass public if it's gonna be aimed at that.
I think there were rumors a year ago or so of DJI building a VTOL actually, but it turned out that it was fake.
Well, they might be, but it would make sense for larger scale applications, industrial use. I don't see how they can sell that to a regular Joe for use in his backyard like they do the Mavic or the Phantoms.
Yeah, I mean, the Parrot Disco was actually scrapped from Parrot, as no one was buying it until they dropped the price to I think South Coast or so. But they continued it a year later, but only as for industrial use at a very, very high price point with their infrared camera. They still sell it, so it's still running, but only for industrial use, like agro stuff, and yeah.
Interesting. Well, guys, I think we're at the end here. I do really want to thank Nikola. Anything else before we wrap this up?
I don't know, nothing specific, but if you can think of something.
Oh,
I'm still here, still alive.
You mentioned you go through planes. You get shipped new planes, and it's very few that you keep. So what are your favorite planes that you've actually kept?
Oh, the XUAV Clouds.
Yeah.
I don't like the Mini Goose or White Goose. I don't know what they called the plane that replaced it. But just look, it's pretty much the same plane. I think the wingspan is just a tad smaller. But as far as configuration, the way it assembles, the way the tail is, it's pretty much the same plane. The major thing that they changed was the internal space. And they pretty much ruined it because they separated it in 3 compartments, which is ridiculous. Because that removes, unless you cut out the firewall between the front 2 ones to actually make it usable, that would never work for me, for instance. I would probably cut it out and try to reinforce it in some other way, because that separation would never work. But as far as flyers, that is a plane that can really bite you in the ass if you get the CG wrong. But then it does something, I've crashed it, but then it does something very funny. You get the CG wrong, the moment the throttle drops, it goes into, it goes like that. Literally, it falls down like an autumn leaf. So there's no speed to it. It's tricky to get out of that, although it's doable. But it's an interesting thing to see, a plane falling like this with no direction or no spin. It's just this crazy jumble of movements just everywhere, and it just gently touches the ground in some orientation with pretty minimal damage. You move the battery, half a centimeter forward to get the CG right, and it's just a dream. I mean, I've had flights out to 20-something kilometers. I turn around, I let go of the sticks, drop the throttle down to just barely over pure gliding, and just leave it like that, and occasionally look at the screen to see how things are going. And it's still keeping straight towards me, and it's still gliding perfectly without any hint of tip stall. Really, really amazing plane. And the other one, like I already mentioned recently, I've had a lot of fun with the Reptile Dragon. Yeah, weird looking plane, but that thing is amazing. That thing is a pretty darn good flyer. It can fly slow, which is critical for beginners, because you can actually give it to a beginner, and those twin tractor props are gonna make sure he's not gonna cut his sense throwing it in the air. Also, they're gonna make sure he doesn't botch it, especially if he puts an autopilot in it to stabilize it on takeoff, which is probably recommended to do either way. Doesn't tip stall, and flies slow, flies fast, and you can do quite a lot with it, and it's pretty simple. You've got 2 motors, 2 servos, and that's it.
Wow. Yeah, that's a fairly inexpensive plane. It's only around $80, I believe, on Banggood. Yeah. And it
actually comes pretty much pre-assembled. You have to put the pieces together, tighten down a few screws, maybe glue in the vertical stabilizer if you feel like it. And that's it. It's pretty much ready to go.
Okay, yeah, that's
the plug-and-play version, that is. The kit version would probably require a bit more work.
It's a plank plane, so it does not have it has a tail, but it does not have elevator on the back. Does it have elevator? It doesn't have rudder. Is
it's elevons. It's like a flying wing.
Okay.
Yeah, plank just means that the wings are straight out at the sides, and they're a bit more pitch sensitive. And
yeah, well, the other thing that actually flies pretty good is the Argborg Vito plane, but that's a bit more specific. I don't know about it for plane only. It doesn't have it's not gonna do well with any sharp movements because it doesn't have a spar. It actually doesn't have a single piece of carbon anywhere on it, which gives it a pretty interesting flexibility when crash landing it. But I always feel like at its speed, any sharp movement is just gonna snap it, because there's nothing there. It's just foam. And the hatch is not made to be a structural element of that foam. It's just something to cover the hole with.
But you like the Ranger line of planes too. You always talk about the Ranger lines, or you were talking about a few years ago.
Actually, the Ranger X, the Rangers are pretty dang good planes if you don't use a lot of throttle, because there's still that slightly nose down issue, and it does affect it. But the wings on those now, they're pretty good. I also actually I very much enjoy the Phoenix planes as well, and the 2400 model with the largest wings. That one is very sweet. That is a very good one, and you put a camera on the tail so you can also see the whole plane, wingtip to wingtip. That is a marvelous sight. I absolutely love that, and I'm constantly thinking about it, but I never have time to fly it anymore. It's just sitting and gathering dust. So it's in that stage of its life now.
So now you're doing this full time, and so you're building planes and doing reviews, and so you're putting the reviews out, and that's what's taking all your time away from flying these other planes you like as well.
Well, I do get to fly the XUAV Clouds. I haven't flown an EDF in quite some time, and the 2 I still have are both broken, so I have to do repairs on them. One is an F-16 with a 90mm EDF unit. The other one is that Rafale thing that I actually have a 70mm turbine to install in it as an upgrade, running 6S. But because it has so much glue on it by now, I might as well go for all-out large EDF with running 6S, see what it can do. If there's gonna be one final crash, might as well be Graham. So it's pretty much like a flying brick now. There's like epoxy, hot glue, some other types of glue. The nose is now made up of like a billion different pieces. It's been broken so many times. And I do have actually a few scale planes that I still have to. They've been sitting in boxes for probably over 2 years. One is a Sky Fortress, the other one is a DHC Beaver. Pretty good looking one. And I'm really looking forward to finding the time to build those and flying them. But probably won't be FPV reviews, those two.
Well, cool. Well, Nikola, thank you so much. You have a Patreon account where people can support your channel. and it can be found on YouTube.
My affiliate links as well.
And your affiliate links as well.
Either works the same.
Fantastic. Well, we certainly appreciate having you here today. And
It's a pleasure.
yeah, great. We've enjoyed it. And thanks again. And for Mark Hoffman, Garen Lyons, and Luke, I'm Steve saying thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Okay, stream.